The gun was pointed at Han Do-yoon's forehead before he even reached for his water glass. He didn't blink. He didn't reach for the weapon strapped beneath his jacket. He sat perfectly still in a leather booth, in a restaurant that didn't officially exist, staring down the barrel of a Glock held by a man who had already killed 11 of his men that month. And the only thought running through his mind was this: nobody in this city was supposed to be able to touch him here. This place was supposed to be safe. He was wrong, and in about 90 seconds, his entire understanding of his own marriage was about to collapse in front of 40 of the most dangerous people on the West Coast. But to understand how Han Do-yoon ended up on the wrong end of a loaded gun in a restaurant with no name, you have to go back 6 months, to a wedding night that started with silence instead of celebration. Before we go further, if stories like this keep you up late scrolling, hit that subscribe button right now. I promise you, what happens in the next few minutes will stay with you. Now, back to the story. Cheryl Ann Boudreaux lay awake in a bed too large for one person, in a penthouse 40 floors above the streets of downtown Los Angeles. The sheets on the other side of the mattress had already gone cold. They usually did. Her husband of 6 hours, Han Do-yoon, had left before midnight to handle what he called business. She hadn't asked what kind. She already knew better than most. To the outside world, this marriage was simple. Han Do-yoon ran a shipping and logistics company with legitimate ports of call from Incheon to Long Beach. Cheryl came from a respected Savannah, Georgia family with 3 generations in the same industry. 2 powerful families joining hands over cargo manifests and trade routes. A clean, sensible business arrangement dressed up in wedding white. That was the story everyone was told. It was not the truth. The next morning, Cheryl set a small trap in the kitchen. Nothing dangerous, just a slice of bread left in the toaster far too long. The smoke curled up toward the ceiling just as Do-yoon walked in, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been born on his body. He looked at the smoke, he looked at her, and he sighed, the way a man sighs at a child who has tried something far beyond her ability. "You don't need to trouble yourself with this," he said, gently pulling her hand away from the toaster like it might bite her. "I'll have someone hired by this afternoon. You're my wife, Cheryl. You're meant to be taken care of, not put to work." She gave him a soft, grateful smile, the kind that made a man feel like a protector. The moment the front door clicked shut behind him, that smile disappeared. Cheryl stood alone in the kitchen for exactly 30 seconds, listening to the quiet settle over the penthouse. Then she walked calmly to the toaster, threw out the burnt bread, and disappeared into the walk-in pantry. She pressed her palm against a panel that looked like nothing more than tile. It slid open with a quiet hum, revealing a black case. Inside sat a handgun, cleaned and ready, along with a leather-bound notebook filled with names Do-yoon would never recognize. Han Do-yoon believed he had married a soft-spoken Southern woman who understood nothing about his world. He had no idea he had married the one person in Los Angeles that even his enemies were afraid to cross. Now, if this story is already pulling you in, don't scroll away yet. Stay with me, because the moment where everything unravels for Han Do-yoon is coming, and you don't want to miss the exact second his whole world changes forever. Make sure you're subscribed so you catch every part of this. Across town, in a boardroom on the top floor of a building with no sign on the door, Han Do-yoon stood at the head of a long table, staring at a map of the city's shipping corridors. Red markers bled across 3 docks that had belonged to his family for 2 generations. Now those same docks were burned, robbed, and stained with the blood of his own men. "They hit the warehouse on Terminal Island before sunrise," said Jun-ho Buck, one of his senior lieutenants, his voice tight with something close to fear. 6 men dead. They didn't just take the shipment, boss. They torched everything else. Millions gone in smoke. Do-yoon's jaw tightened. And the driver. Found near the harbor. It wasn't quick. Silence fell over the room. 12 men sat at that table, the inner circle of the Baco syndicate. and not one of them had an answer for what was happening to their territory. The man responsible for it was named Femi Okonkwo Reyes, a mercenary who had crawled his way up through the ports of Long Beach with nothing but violence and a taste for chaos. He didn't want territory the way other men wanted it. He wanted to watch things burn and call it business. He had no code, no loyalty, no lines he wouldn't cross, and every man in that boardroom knew it. "We go to war," said Marcus Delgado, the youngest capo at the table, his knuckles white against the wood. "We outnumber him 3-1. And lose half our men doing it," Duyun said coldly. "Okonkwo Reyes wants a war. He doesn't have anything left to lose, we do." It was an older man near the back of the room who finally spoke, a man who had served Duyun's father before him. Park Sang-guk stepped into the light, leaning on a silver-tipped cane. "There is one place he will not touch," Sang-guk said quietly. "One place respected by every serious organization on the West Coast. Cartels, triads, even men like Okonkwo Reyes know better than to test it." Duyun frowned. "I know every territory in this city. I know of no such place." "It doesn't belong to a territory," Sang-guk said. "It moves. It only opens by invitation, and only when the situation calls for it. They call the woman who runs it Mama Cheryl. If you're enjoying this so far, take 2 seconds and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and it means more than you know. Now let's get back to it, because what Han Do-yoon discovers next is going to change everything." Do-yoon almost laughed. "I've never heard that name in my life." "Few have, unless they need to," Sang-guk said. "Nobody knows where she came from. Some say she buried a husband in the 90s and inherited his enemies along with his debts. Others say she worked for people the government doesn't officially admit exist. What matters is this: if you spill blood inside her restaurant, every organization on this coast turns against you within 48 hours. Nobody survives that, not even Okonkwo Reyes." Do-yoon processed this in silence. A truly neutral space, backed by the collective fear of the entire underworld, might be the only way to force a man like Okonkwo Reyes to sit still long enough to negotiate. "Find her," Do-yoon said. "Whatever it costs." That night, the rain came down hard over the streets of Los Angeles as Do-yoon's car rolled toward an address with no sign, no light, nothing to mark it as anything other than an abandoned building near the harbor. But as he stepped out into the rain, he caught it. Garlic, butter, something sweet, and something smoked, drifting from a building that looked completely empty from the outside. He had no idea that the smell pulling him toward that door was the same smell that filled his own kitchen every morning. He had no idea he was about to walk, unarmed, into the one place on earth where his wife held more power than he ever had. If you've made it this far, you already know this story is going somewhere you didn't expect. Hit that like button right now, subscribe if you haven't, and turn on notifications, because the next part is where everything changes, and I promise, you will not see it coming. Let's continue. The heavy oak door in front of him didn't open right away. A small slot slid back at eye level, and a pair of sharp eyes studied him in silence before the door finally swung inward. 3 deadbolts had to be turned before he could step through, and once he did, the outside world disappeared completely. The room beyond was warm and dim, lit by candles instead of bulbs, the walls lined with old photographs of jazz musicians and city streets from another era. A man built like a linebacker stood behind a small counter, dressed in a tuxedo that didn't quite hide the years he'd spent as muscle for someone. "Weapons," the man said. It wasn't a request. Do-yoon's men hesitated. Giving up a weapon in unfamiliar territory went against everything they'd been trained to do. But Do-yoon set the example first, placing his own sidearm on the velvet tray without a word. One by one, his men followed. If the other man kept his weapon, Junho muttered under his breath, We're walking in blind." "He didn't," the doorman said flatly. "Or he wouldn't be alive right now. This is Mama Cheryl's house. You enter in peace, or you don't enter at all." Beyond the velvet curtain, the room opened into something Do-yoon never expected. Candlelight, soft music, the smell of butter and garlic, and something smoked and sweet drifting from a kitchen somewhere behind the scenes. And scattered across the tables, eating in plain sight, were faces Do-yoon recognized from every corner of organized crime on the West Coast. Men who were supposedly enemies, sharing plates of food like old friends at a family dinner. Nobody here carried a weapon, nobody here needed to. Femi Okonkwo Reyes was already seated in a corner booth, tearing into a plate of short ribs with his bare hands, grease shining on his chin. He looked up as Do-yoon approached, a wide, mocking grin spreading across his face. "Han Do-yoon," he said, drawing the name out like a joke. "Good of you to come out of your tower. Before we go further, I want to say something real quick. If this story has you sitting on the edge of your seat, that's exactly why I do this. Hit subscribe if you haven't yet, because the next few minutes are the reason this story exists. Let's get back into it." Do-yoon slid into the booth across from him, refusing the menu a waiter tried to hand him. "I'm here to stop a war you can't win." Okonkwo Reyes laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "You call this business? It's not business, it's the street. And the street belongs to whoever's hungry enough to take it. You took one warehouse," Do-yoon said, his voice dropping low and even. "Don't mistake a lucky night for power. If I let my full organization loose on you, there won't be a corner of this city left for you to hide in." "Big talk," Okonkwo Reyes said, "for a man who came here to beg." "I'm not begging, I'm offering terms. You pull back past the harbor line, you pay for what you burned, and you hand over the men who tortured my driver." The room seemed to hold its breath. Then Okonkwo Reyes smiled wider, and his hand disappeared into his jacket. "To hell with your terms," he said, "and to hell with this sanctuary." The gun came up fast, the barrel leveling directly between Do-yoon's eyes. Every sound in the restaurant died at once. Forks stopped moving, glasses stopped clinking, even the music seemed to fade into the background. Do-yoon didn't move. He didn't have time to. He calculated the distance, knowing it wasn't enough, knowing this was the moment his calm, careful life finally caught up with him. Then the kitchen doors slammed open. Steam rolled out across the floor, backlit by harsh light, and a figure stepped through it that made every hardened criminal in that room lower their eyes. She wore a white apron over a deep red dress, her hair pulled back tight, a heavy cast-iron skillet hanging from one hand like it weighed nothing at all. Her heels struck the floor with a slow, deliberate rhythm that felt louder than any gunshot. Han Do-yoon's mind went completely blank. It was Cheryl. If you're feeling that same shock right now that Do-yoon felt in that restaurant, drop a comment and tell me, did you see this coming, or did it hit you just as hard as it hit him? I want to know. Now let's see what happens next. She didn't look at her husband. Her eyes were locked entirely on Okonkwo Reyes, and something in her expression made the massive man's hand begin to shake. "You brought a gun into my dining room," she said, and her voice was nothing like the one Do-yoon had heard every night for 6 months. It was low, steady, and carried a weight that silenced the entire building. "You threatened a guest while your food is getting cold on the table." Okonkwo Reyes swung the barrel toward her, and in a single motion, too fast to follow, Cheryl closed the distance and seized his wrist, twisting until the weapon clattered onto the table. She leaned in close and whispered something into his ear that no one else in the room could hear. Whatever it was, it broke him completely. His face went pale, and for the first time since he'd arrived in Los Angeles, Femi Okonkwo Reyes looked afraid. Cheryl straightened, scanned the room, and every powerful man seated there lowered his head in respect. "Sorry, Mama Cheryl," one of them murmured. Others echoed it, one after another, until the words moved through the room like a wave. Only then did she turn to look at her husband, and in her eyes, Do-yoon saw the truth. The woman he had married for a shipping contract, the woman he had told not to worry her pretty head about the complexities of his world, was the very legend his own men had been terrified to even speak of by name. "Enjoy your dinner, Mr. Han," she said quietly, and walked back through the kitchen doors, the skillet still swinging gently at her side. The ride home was silent. Do-yoon sat rigid in the back seat, his hands clenched on his knees, replaying every conversation he'd ever had with his wife, hearing his own words in his head like an accusation. "You wouldn't understand the complexities of men's wars." He had said that to her, to Mama Cheryl. The moment they stepped into the penthouse, he turned on her. "You lied to me," he said, his voice shaking with something between fury and disbelief. "I left out professional details," she corrected calmly. "The same way you left out that you were losing a war to a man who tortures people for fun." "You made a fool of me," he said, crossing the room in 3 long strides. "I treated you like glass. I explained things to you like you were a child." "And you loved it," she said, refusing to back down. "You loved coming home to a wife who needed you for everything. I gave you exactly what you wanted to see." If this story is hitting you the way it hit me the first time I heard something like it, don't scroll past this part, like this video right now, because what Cheryl says next is the entire reason this story exists. "I didn't marry you for protection," she said, her voice softening just slightly. "I didn't need your money or your name. I needed a distraction. My family has spent 3 generations keeping dangerous men calm enough to talk instead of kill each other. That restaurant isn't just a restaurant, Do-yoon. It's how I keep people safe. But the kind of money that moves through it draws attention. Federal attention. I needed someone loud enough, visible enough, that nobody would look twice at a quiet southern woman standing behind him." Do-yoon stared at her, the anger in his chest slowly turning into something else entirely. He hadn't married a woman who needed protecting. He had married someone who had been protecting people, quietly, for years, while he stood in the spotlight without ever knowing it. Before either of them could say another word, a phone rang. Not his, hers. A cheap, plain phone she pulled from a drawer he'd never noticed before. She answered it, listened for only a few seconds, and her whole posture changed. "Lock the vault," she said quietly. "Burn the ledgers. I'm on my way." She hung up and looked at her husband, and for the first time, real fear crossed her face. "Okonkwo Reyes didn't learn his lesson," she said. "He's hitting the restaurant right now, and he knows the blind spots. He knows the patrol routes. Someone gave him that information." Do-yoon felt his stomach drop. Only a handful of people had access to that level of detail about his own security operations, which meant somebody close to him, somebody he trusted, had helped burn down his wife's entire world. If you want to know exactly who betrayed them and how far this story is about to go, make sure you're subscribed, because I promise you, the next part is where everything comes to a head. Let's finish this. They arrived at the restaurant to find the front doors blown off their hinges, splintered wood scattered across wet pavement, and the guard who normally checked weapons at the door lying still on the steps. Cheryl knelt beside him for only a moment before rising again, her face hard as stone. Inside, the dining room had become a battlefield, overturned tables, broken glass, the unmistakable sound of gunfire echoing from somewhere near the kitchen. Do-shun and Cheryl moved through the wreckage together, covering each other without needing to speak, clearing the room side by side. In the kitchen, they found Okonkwo Reyes and his remaining men trying to cut through the steel door of a hidden vault, and standing beside them, hands raised, was a face Do-yoon never expected to see there. Marcus Delgado, the same young capo who had argued for war back in the boardroom. "Boss, wait," Marcus said, his voice trembling. "Let me explain." Explain how you sold out your own people, Do-yun said, his voice dead calm, the voice he used when a man was already as good as gone. You were weak, Marcus shot back, panic rising in his voice. You wanted to sit down and talk instead of fight. Okonkwo Reyes offered me control of the western docks once he took you out. He offered you 30 pieces of silver, Cheryl said quietly, and you choked on it. Marcus raised his weapon, and in the same instant, Do-yun and Cheryl fired together, the two shots landing almost as one. It was over in seconds. Okonkwo Reyes and the man who had betrayed them both lay still among the wreckage of the restaurant that had once been untouchable. Silence settled over the ruined kitchen. Do-yun looked at his wife, blood and soot on her face, exhaustion finally catching up to her, and he realized he had never respected anyone the way he respected her in that moment. Without a word, Cheryl walked to the one stove that had somehow survived the chaos, pulled a cast-iron skillet from the rack, and began to cook. Do-yun watched her, stunned, as the smell of frying chicken slowly filled a room that had been full of gunfire only minutes before. "What are you doing?" he asked quietly. "I'm cooking," she said simply. "You missed dinner." She handed him a plate. Crisp fried chicken beside a scoop of creamy mac and cheese, laced with kimchi, a dish that belonged to two families, two countries, and two people who had finally stopped hiding from each other. Do-yun took the plate, and instead of looking for a table, he sank slowly to his knees, right there on the tile floor, surrounded by everything they had survived together. "I thought I had to protect you," he said. "I was wrong. You are the strongest person I have ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life earning the kind of trust you never should have had to hide from me." Cheryl looked down at him, a single tear cutting through the soot on her cheek, and for the first time since their wedding night, the distance between them was completely gone. There's a lesson in what happened between Han Do-yun and Cheryl Boudreaux that goes far beyond gunfire and secrets. Real strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one everyone else assumes is soft. And real partnership isn't built on who holds the most power. It's built on the moment two people finally stop hiding from each other and choose honesty instead. If this story meant something to you tonight, do me a favor, subscribe, turn on your notifications so you never miss the next one, and leave a comment telling me which part hit you hardest. Somebody out there needs to hear your thoughts today. I'll see you in the next story.